Racist officer mocking a black woman, unaware she's the judge who will decide his fate. The heavy scent of stale coffee mixed with the harsh metallic tang of sweat filled the air as Judge Anna Lewis sat alone in the interrogation room, her fingers trembling slightly as they hovered over the edge of her leather-bound notebook. The sterile white walls, the fluorescent lights flickering above her, and the uncomfortable chair she sat on all created a suffocating atmosphere. The tension in the room was almost palpable, an unbearable silence hung between the walls, broken only by the distant hum of the police station. She had been waiting for what felt like hours, but her mind was elsewhere, lost in a storm of thoughts. Outside, the world moved on, oblivious to the whirlwind of emotions she was about to face. Anna had been through a lot recently, but this moment, this encounter, it had the power to unravel everything she had worked for. The door to the room creaked open, and in walked Officer William Jones. Tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing the typical air of superiority, he had always been a presence that demanded attention. His uniform, crisply pressed, betrayed nothing of what lay underneath, no trace of the anger or bitterness that often boiled just beneath the surface. His eyes locked onto Anna with an unreadable gaze as he took his place across from her. "I don't think we've met," he said with a smirk, his voice dripping with condescension. Anna's heart sank. She had heard the rumors about William, whispers of his prejudices, his blatant racism that no one had dared to confront. It was well known among the officers that he carried a deep disdain for anyone who wasn't like him, white, male, and privileged. Anna's dark skin, her long curly hair, and her polished, confident demeanor had always made her a target in the predominantly white precinct, but she had always held her ground. That was until now. Her fingers clenched around the pen in her hand, the grip tight, as if she could squeeze the anger and humiliation back into her chest. She knew better than to let him see her discomfort. "I'm Judge Lewis," she replied, her voice steady, her eyes unwavering as she met his gaze. "And you are?" He chuckled softly, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed. "Judge? Really?" He tilted his head, scrutinizing her with a predatory gleam in his eyes. "What's a woman like you doing in a position like that? You don't seem like the type." The words hit her like a slap across the face. It wasn't the first time she had heard them, but the sting was just as sharp. Her chest tightened, her breath catching in her throat as the familiar feeling of being dismissed, belittled, and erased surged within her. In that moment, all of her achievements, all of the late nights, the hours of studying, the sacrifices she had made to climb her way to this position, none of it seemed to matter. But what hurt most was the realization that this wasn't just about her career. It was about her identity, her very existence. To William, she was nothing more than a stereotype, a person who didn't belong in a space like this. A black woman in a position of power? Ridiculous. His words continued to cut deep, one after the other, as he spoke about her with a mockery so blatant, so unrelenting, that it took everything in Anna to remain calm. "You think you're one of us? Just because you got a degree doesn't mean you belong," he sneered, the words dripping from his lips like venom. "You're just like the rest of them. You've got that attitude, that superiority complex, but we all know who you really are." The more he spoke, the more Anna felt the weight of his disdain crushing her. Every insult, every put-down, seemed to dig deeper into her soul. She wanted to lash out, to fight back with everything she had. But something held her back. It wasn't just the job. It was the knowledge that her response, however justified, would only feed into his belief that she was less than him. That she was not worthy of respect. But the truth was, Anna had spent years burying her hurt. She had spent years proving herself, showing her worth to a world that was determined to see her as nothing more than an outsider. From the moment she had entered the university, she had been met with skepticism and doubt. As a woman of color, she had to work twice as hard to gain the same respect as her peers. And yet, No matter how much she accomplished, no matter how much she achieved, she was never truly seen. Her life, from the moment she was born, had been a constant battle against rejection, humiliation, and abandonment. As a child, her parents had abandoned her, leaving her to grow up in foster care. She had been passed from one home to another, never quite feeling at home anywhere. Every rejection, every form of neglect had carved a deep scar in her heart that she had spent years trying to heal. And now, here she was again, facing the same rejection, the same humiliation, this time from a man who was supposed to protect and serve the public. William leaned in, his eyes narrowing as he studied her, as if he was trying to gauge her reaction. "I don't know how you even made it this far," he continued, his tone dripping with contempt. "It's just sad, really. All these people are just handing you things because they feel sorry for you. You're nothing but a token." Anna's breath hitched, and for a moment, she felt herself breaking. The weight of the world seemed to collapse onto her, and she could feel the familiar sting of tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. But no! She wouldn't cry. Not here. Not now. Instead, she stood up, her posture rigid with determination, and met his gaze with fire in her eyes. "I didn't get here because of anyone's pity. I earned it," she said, her voice low and steady. "And I'm not going anywhere." William smirked, clearly not expecting her to stand her ground. He laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound that grated against Anna's already raw nerves. "Keep telling yourself that," he muttered, standing up to leave. "But deep down, you know the truth." As the door slammed shut behind him, Anna's heart pounded in her chest, her hands shaking. She had faced so much pain, so much adversity in her life, but this was different. It wasn't just about her race. It wasn't just about her gender. It was about something deeper, a belief that she didn't belong, that she was nothing more than a shadow in a world that refused to see her. But she wasn't done. She would fight this. She would fight him. And in the end, she would prove him wrong. The hours following the encounter in the interrogation room dragged on, each moment feeling like a weight pressing down on Anna's chest. She had faced countless trials in her life, but the words that Officer William Jones had thrown at her were unlike anything she had ever heard. The humiliation of it all, it was suffocating. As she walked through the dimly lit corridors of the police station, her footsteps echoed with an emptiness she couldn't shake. She passed officers who, for the most part, ignored her. There was no camaraderie here. No shared understanding. Just a cold, unspoken acknowledgement that she didn't belong. In her uniform, her position as a judge felt like an illusion, something others tolerated but didn't truly respect. She reached her desk, her hands instinctively gripping the edges as if it could anchor her to something solid. The files in front of her were a blur. Her mind was far away, lost in the sting of William's words. "You don't belong here," he had said. His voice, laced with condescension, replayed in her mind. The words cut deeper than anything she had endured before. They weren't just about her being a woman of color in a predominantly white space. They were about her very worth as a human being. Anna's pulse quickened. She had fought so hard to get here. She had pushed through every obstacle life had thrown her way, from the abandonment by her parents, the years spent in foster care, to the countless microaggressions she faced on the daily. Every step had been a battle. But now, sitting at her desk in the precinct, she felt like the battles had been in vain. All her hard work, all the sacrifices, seemed to amount to nothing in the eyes of someone like William. Her fingers hovered over the stack of reports, but she couldn't bring herself to focus. Her mind kept returning to the words that stung so deeply. Anna Lewis, a woman of color, had made it through the police academy with honors, had worked her way through the ranks, earning every shred of respect she'd gained. But to William, all of that was meaningless. She was just a token to him, nothing more than a black woman in a sea of white faces, someone who didn't belong. The shame and rejection threatened to drown her. Her breath grew shallow, her chest tightening. She closed her eyes and leaned back in her chair, trying to steady herself. Her thoughts began to spiral, and she felt the walls closing in. But then something inside her shifted. She had always fought back. Whether it was the heartbreak of abandonment or the cruel words of those who thought her inferior, she had learned to rise above. The same strength she had built over the years now pulsed through her veins. She wouldn't let William Jones, or anyone else, take that from her. I am more than their prejudices. I am more than their hate. She clenched her fists on the desk, a renewed fire igniting inside her. She wasn't about to let him, or anyone, define her worth. The door to her office suddenly swung open, and Detective Maria Fish, a colleague Anna had grown close to, stepped inside. Maria, an ally and friend in a world that often felt isolating, immediately noticed the tension in Anna's posture. "You good?" Maria asked, her voice gentle but filled with concern. Anna didn't look up at first, taking a deep breath. "I've been better," she replied, her tone weary. Maria crossed the room, sitting across from Anna. "I overheard some of what William said to you earlier. I swear, sometimes I don't know how he still gets away with it." Her words were laced with frustration. Anna finally lifted her gaze to meet Maria's eyes. She had always known Maria had her back. But even so, she couldn't bring herself to share how deeply the encounter had affected her. There were some pains that couldn't be healed with words. "I just don't know why it's so easy for people like him to look at me and see nothing but a stereotype," Anna confessed, her voice small. "Like everything I've done, everything I've worked for, it doesn't even matter." Maria leaned forward, her expression softening. "He's a racist pig, Anna. Don't let him get to you." But Anna shook her head. "It's not just him, Maria. It's everyone. All the things I've had to fight for just to be seen as equal. And it still doesn't change the fact that some people will always think I don't belong." Maria was silent for a moment, as if contemplating Anna's words. Then, she reached across the desk, placing a hand on Anna's. "You're more than any of them," she said quietly. "Don't forget that." Anna's eyes welled up with unshed tears. She had spent years fighting to prove her worth, to be seen as worthy of respect, but the more she fought, the more the world seemed to push back. The weight of it all, the loneliness, the exhaustion, had finally caught up with her. And yet, deep inside, there was a part of her that refused to break. No matter how many times William or anyone else tried to tear her down, Anna knew she wasn't just a product of their prejudice. She was a woman of strength. A woman who had been through hell and had come out the other side stronger for it. But the hardest part was yet to come. The realization that William didn't just see her as inferior, he saw her as disposable. And that, more than anything, was what hurt the most. Days turned into weeks, but the sting of Officer Jones' words refused to fade. Every time Anna entered the precinct, she felt a sense of unease creep over her. The hallway no longer felt like a place of purpose, it felt like a battlefield. Every officer, every glance, reminded her of the cold disdain that she had come to expect from those who couldn't accept her presence. The weight of it all was suffocating, a constant, invisible hand pressing against her chest. The precinct was quieter now, and Anna found herself walking with her head slightly bowed, as if the very act of holding it up might draw more attention to herself. She'd always been proud to walk with confidence, to show the world she had earned her place. But now, every step felt like a compromise, like a surrender to the truth she had been fighting to ignore. The worst part? It wasn't just William. The subtle whispers, the sideways glances, the moments when her presence felt like an intrusion, they all began to eat away at her. She had to prove herself constantly, not just as a detective, but as a human being worthy of respect. It was exhausting. Anna began to withdraw. The vibrant woman who had once loved her job, who had once embraced the challenge of every case, became a shadow of herself. She stopped going to the office after hours, skipped out on briefings, and withdrew from any social interactions with her colleagues. The thought of facing William or anyone else in the station was enough to make her stomach churn. Every corner, every room felt like a reminder that she wasn't seen for her abilities, but for the color of her skin. Her phone vibrated on her desk, breaking her thoughts. It was a message from her lawyer, a reminder about the case she had been overseeing for the past few weeks. She had pushed it to the back of her mind, another thing she had been avoiding. The case was a high-profile one, and as much as it terrified her to step back into the courtroom, she knew this was her chance to reclaim her strength. It was time to stop hiding. As she arrived at the courthouse the following morning, Anna couldn't help but feel the weight of everything: William, the officers in the precinct, the constant barrage of small injustices that had added up over the years. But there, in the grand space of the courtroom, she felt a slight shift. This was her domain. Her place of power. The jury, the defense, the prosecution, all were there to answer to her. She was Judge Anna Lewis. She wasn't just a woman in uniform anymore. She was the one who held the power to change lives. And it was in the courtroom, as she presided over her first case of the day, that Anna found herself in a rare moment of peace. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was no longer the target of others' biases. She was the one who commanded respect. She was the one who made the decisions. The trial continued throughout the day, and Anna began to regain her sense of purpose. This was what she was meant to do. The case was complex, but she was more than capable of handling it. Her sharp mind, her legal acumen, and her tenacity were what had gotten her to this point. She wasn't just the woman William had mocked in the precinct. She was more. But as the day wore on and the case drew to a close, Anna found herself thinking of William again. His mocking words, his arrogant demeanor. She could almost hear his voice, still fresh in her memory. Keep telling yourself that. But deep down, you know the truth. Anna's hands clenched under the table. She had no idea how wrong he was. The trial was finally over, and Anna prepared to retire for the night. She had made her ruling, and the case was complete. As she walked to her car in the empty parking lot, a sudden sound of footsteps behind her made her stop. It was a familiar sound, one that immediately sent a wave of unease through her. She turned slowly, recognizing the figure approaching from the dim light. It was William. He was dressed in plain clothes, a jacket draped over his shoulder as he walked with his usual cocky stride. His eyes locked onto hers with that same smirk he had worn when they first met. The expression didn't change as he drew closer. "Judge Lewis," William said, his voice still laced with mockery. "I see you're playing dress-up today. You really do like to act like you belong, don't you?" Anna froze, her heart racing. She had known this moment would come, but she hadn't expected it to feel like this, like a moment she couldn't control. "Is there something you want, Officer Jones?" Anna's voice was steady, but the anger that flared within her was hard to hide. "I suggest you leave." William chuckled, clearly enjoying the discomfort he was causing. "I just thought I'd pay a visit. After all, you've worked so hard to get where you are. But let's be honest, you're just a product of the system. They put you up there because they needed someone to fill a quota, didn't they?" His words cut deep. The implications of them were not just personal, they were societal, reinforcing the very idea that a black woman couldn't possibly have earned her place in the system. It was a system that had been designed to keep people like her down. Anna took a deep breath, fighting the urge to snap. She couldn't let him get to her anymore. She had learned too much, fought too hard to let him, or anyone, dictate her worth. "I'm not who you think I am," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "And you will never understand the strength it took for me to get here." William took a step forward, leaning in closer. "No matter how much you pretend, deep down, you'll always be just a token," he spat. But before Anna could respond, something in her shifted. In that moment, she realized something profound. This man, this officer who had ridiculed her, didn't deserve the power he had over her thoughts, her emotions. He didn't deserve to take up space in her mind any longer. Without saying another word, Anna turned and walked toward her car. William called after her, but she didn't look back. As she drove home that night, the weight she had carried for so long began to lift. She had reclaimed her strength, not by fighting William on his terms, but by walking away from the battle he wanted to provoke. He had no power over her anymore. And she knew then, she didn't just belong. She had earned her place, in every corner of the courtroom, in the police station, and in the world. William had no idea who he was really messing with. The days after the encounter in the parking lot felt surreal to Anna. She had walked away from William with a sense of triumph, but deep down, she knew the battle wasn't over. It wasn't just about William anymore, it was about everything he represented. The prejudices, the assumptions, the systems designed to keep people like her from truly thriving. But there was another feeling creeping in, one Anna wasn't sure how to name. It wasn't anger or resentment, but a cold, heavy realization that something had to change. She had fought for so long to prove herself in this space, to be seen as more than just her skin color or gender. But in doing so, had she sacrificed her sense of self? Was she truly thriving, or was she merely surviving, hiding behind titles and accomplishments that ultimately meant nothing if they came at the cost of her own peace? Anna sat at her desk in the courthouse the following week, sifting through case files. The weight of her thoughts grew heavier with each passing hour. She thought about William, about everything he had said to her that night. It was so easy for him to dismiss her, to look at her as a quota or a token. But was that how others saw her too? Had her life been a constant battle to prove her worth, to prove she belonged? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. "Judge Lewis?" Maria's voice called softly from the other side. Anna quickly wiped a tear that had escaped down her cheek. She hadn't realized she'd been crying. "Come in," she said, her voice composed but weary. Maria stepped in, closing the door gently behind her. Her eyes softened when she saw Anna's expression. "You good?" she asked, her voice full of concern. Anna nodded, though she didn't feel it. "I'm just tired, Maria." Maria sat down across from her, studying her friend carefully. "You've been through a lot lately, Anna. You don't have to carry it all on your own. Whatever's going on, you don't have to go through this alone." Anna let out a long breath, her shoulders sagging. "It's just, sometimes I feel like no matter what I do, it's never enough. There's always someone waiting to tear me down, to remind me that I don't belong." Maria's eyes narrowed, her frustration with the system she worked within bubbling up. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Anna. You've earned everything you have. And anyone who tells you otherwise is just too ignorant to see the truth. You're more than they'll ever be." Anna's chest tightened as she looked at her friend. Maria's words were comforting, but they didn't quite erase the ache in her heart. The words of William echoed in her mind, always just beneath the surface. "I know. But why does it have to be so hard, Maria?" Anna's voice cracked. "Why does everything have to be harder for me just because of the color of my skin? Why do I have to fight twice as hard to be seen as equal?" Maria reached across the desk, placing her hand gently over Anna's. "You're not alone in this fight. You're never alone." Anna smiled weakly, grateful for her friend's support, but a part of her knew that this was something she had to face on her own. She had always been a warrior, standing tall even when the world tried to tear her down. But the weight of it all had begun to feel unbearable. The next day, Anna was assigned to oversee a sentencing hearing for a high-profile case. A young man had been convicted of assaulting a police officer during a protest, an event that had sparked massive outrage throughout the city. The case had attracted a great deal of media attention, and tensions were running high. As she entered the courtroom, Anna's pulse quickened. She had faced tough cases before, but this one felt different. This one felt personal. She sat at the bench, staring down at the defendant as he was brought before her. His eyes met hers with a mixture of defiance and fear, and for a moment, Anna felt her stomach twist. She wasn't just deciding his fate today, she was deciding something much bigger. Her decision would send a message to everyone who had ever looked down on her, every person who had ever doubted her, every racist who had ever tried to make her feel less than human. But as the trial wore on, Anna found herself distracted. Her thoughts kept returning to William. She could almost hear his mocking voice in the back of her mind, telling her she was nothing more than a pawn in the system, telling her she didn't belong in that courtroom, telling her that no matter how hard she tried, she could never escape the bias that ran deep in society. The trial ended, and Anna took a deep breath, her fingers curling around the gavel. She raised it, ready to pass judgment, but something inside her froze. She couldn't do it, not yet. Not while she was so consumed by anger and hurt. "Your Honor," the prosecutor's voice broke her thoughts. Anna blinked, as if coming out of a trance. She quickly composed herself, her usual confidence slipping back into place. "Yes. I'm ready to pass sentence." She glanced at the defendant once more, but this time, something shifted inside her. She realized that, in some way, this young man wasn't just a product of his circumstances. He was a reflection of a broken system, one that had failed him just as much as it had failed her. Anna didn't give the usual sentence. Instead, she gave him a chance at rehabilitation, a chance to prove that he could rise above the violence he had once participated in. It wasn't an easy decision. It was risky. But Anna knew it was the right one. As the gavel struck, sealing the fate of the defendant, she felt something stir within her. It wasn't just the weight of justice, it was the weight of forgiveness. For the first time in a long time, Anna realized that the most important thing wasn't about proving herself to others or fighting for their acceptance. It was about proving to herself that she could rise above the hate and hurt. The weeks following Anna's decision in the courtroom felt like a turning point. She had chosen a path that was unconventional, risky, but deeply rooted in her belief that change, true change, could only come through understanding, empathy, and giving people a chance to redeem themselves. It wasn't easy. Some colleagues were skeptical, others outright critical, but Anna wasn't swayed. For the first time in a long time, she felt aligned with herself. But with each small victory, each moment of personal growth, there was always that shadow in the back of her mind, the shadow of William Jones. The man who had mocked her, belittled her, and tried to break her down. He had no idea who he was really dealing with. But that didn't change the fact that every encounter with him, every reminder of his arrogance, sent waves of frustration through her. It was another late afternoon when she found herself walking through the courthouse lobby, a briefcase in one hand and a pile of documents in the other. The steady click of her heels echoed on the marble floors. As she passed through the entryway, she noticed a familiar figure standing near the security desk. William. His back was to her, but she could see the way he stood, brash, unbothered. She almost felt a surge of dread in her chest, but she pushed it aside. She had no reason to avoid him anymore. She was Judge Anna Lewis, not the woman he had tried to diminish. Anna took a deep breath and walked toward the elevator, hoping he wouldn't notice her. She was determined not to let him ruin her day, not today. But fate had other plans. Well, came the voice she had grown so tired of hearing. If it isn't the token judge herself. Anna's spine stiffened, but she didn't turn around. Instead, she pressed the button for the elevator and stood tall, her eyes fixed ahead. "Officer Jones," she replied, her tone cool but firm. "What brings you to my courthouse?" William stepped forward, a smirk plastered across his face. "Oh, nothing much. Just here to make sure the system is still doing its job," he said, his words dripping with sarcasm. "I wouldn't want you to go soft on the criminals, Judge Lewis." Anna felt her blood begin to boil, but she kept her expression neutral. "Don't let him win," she reminded herself. This was his game, to provoke, to get under her skin. And she wasn't going to play. Instead of reacting to his jabs, Anna took a slow breath and turned to face him. Her gaze was steady, unwavering. "You have no idea what it's like to stand in my shoes," she said, her voice calm but full of conviction. "To be constantly judged for something you can't change, to be looked down upon just because of the way you were born." William's smirk faltered slightly, but he quickly regained his composure. "I know what it's like to work hard, to earn my place. Something you probably wouldn't understand." Anna's eyes locked onto his, and for the first time, she saw something shift in him, a brief flicker of uncertainty. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He scoffed and stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You think you've earned that title? Think again. You're just a tool in their system. Nothing more. They use you to make themselves look good." Anna could feel the sting of his words, but it was no longer as sharp as it had once been. She wasn't that vulnerable, insecure woman anymore. She wasn't just playing a role to fit in or to prove herself. She had earned her position, and no one, not William or anyone else, could take that from her. She straightened up, facing him with the full weight of her authority. "I'm not the one who has to hide behind racist remarks to feel validated. And you're not the one who gets to decide whether I belong here." William took a step back, his face flushing with anger. "You're right about one thing," he muttered. "I don't decide anything. But I still don't think you deserve to be here. Never will." Anna held his gaze for a moment longer, her jaw set. "Then you'll have to live with that." She stepped into the elevator as the doors began to close, but before they shut completely, she added, "And I'm not going anywhere." The elevator doors closed with a soft ding, and Anna leaned back against the wall, feeling a rush of emotion flood through her. She had stood her ground, not just in the face of William's prejudice, but in the face of her own doubts. She realized that the battle wasn't just with him, it was with herself, with the parts of her that still feared rejection, that still feared not being enough. But she had proven, time and time again, that she was more than enough. As the elevator ascended, Anna caught her reflection in the polished metal. She looked tired, but there was a certain strength in her eyes, one that had been hard-earned and was now unshakable. When the elevator doors opened, she stepped out into the quiet hallway, her mind still buzzing with the exchange. It wasn't just about standing up to William anymore, it was about reclaiming her peace. She wasn't going to let his words, or anyone else's, control her life. She was the one who got to define who she was. As she made her way to her office, Anna's thoughts shifted. What if I'm more than just this courthouse? What if my role is bigger than I even know? And in that moment, she realized something profound. The true power she had wasn't just in the judgments she passed in the courtroom, it was in the choices she made in her own life. She had already started to forgive the past, and with each step, she was learning to let go of the bitterness that had once consumed her. But as she entered her office and began sorting through some papers, her phone buzzed on her desk. She picked it up and saw a message from Maria, asking her to meet for lunch. It had been a while since they had a chance to catch up, and Anna could use a moment of normalcy. She sent a quick reply, And just as she put her phone down, a name on the caller ID caught her attention: William Jones. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "William?" "Judge Lewis," came his voice, surprisingly neutral. "I need to talk to you." Her heart skipped a beat. Something in his tone had shifted, and she couldn't help but wonder, what now? Anna stared at her phone, the name William Jones flashing on the screen. The fact that he was calling her directly, after everything, felt like a strange turn of events. She'd spent weeks wondering whether she was just a pawn in his twisted game, and now he was reaching out. What could he possibly want now? Her fingers hesitated over the screen, unsure if she should answer. But she was curious. She had already made peace with him once, on the surface, at least. She couldn't avoid the conversation forever. Taking a deep breath, she pressed the green button. "William," she said, her voice steady but guarded. "Judge Lewis," his voice came through, low and tentative. I didn't think you'd pick up." Anna narrowed her eyes. There was something about his tone that unsettled her. It wasn't the usual smugness she had come to expect. Instead, it was something closer to vulnerability, almost like he was unsure of himself. "What do you want?" Anna asked, her patience beginning to wear thin. "I don't have time for games." I know it's been a lot between us," William admitted, his voice unusually soft. "Anne, I've been thinking a lot about that night. What I said to you. How I treated you." Anna was taken aback by the admission. She had expected him to mock her, to dig in his heels and continue with the same cruel rhetoric. But this was different. Was this an apology? "I've been wrong," William continued. "I didn't realize it at the time, but the way I treated you, what I said, how I judged you, it was completely out of line. And I'm sorry for that." The apology hung in the air, and for a moment, Anna didn't know how to respond. She had prepared herself for everything except this. Was this some kind of manipulation? Had he seen her as weak enough to fall for an insincere apology? Still, part of her wanted to believe that people could change. Could she accept this? Could she forgive him? "You don't have to apologize to me, William," she replied, her voice firm but not harsh. "You owe it to yourself to make changes, not to me." William was silent for a beat, and then he spoke again, his voice cracking. "I don't think you understand. I don't just owe it to you. I owe it to myself. I've spent my whole life believing in a narrative that I now realize isn't true. That people like you don't belong in positions of power. I've carried those beliefs without ever questioning them." Anna's heart sank. She wanted to be angry, to lash out, to remind him of all the pain he had caused. But she also understood something else, that this was the first time William was facing the truth about himself. It was the beginning of a shift, though she wasn't sure if it was too late for it to matter. "William," she said softly, "do you really think that I belong here because of some quota, because of some idea of me being less than others?" She let the words linger, hoping he would grasp the weight of them. "You may have seen me as an other, but I'm more than that. I am Judge Anna Lewis, and that's because of everything I've done, not just what I look like." William's voice was barely a whisper when he responded. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." Anna sighed deeply, her hand tightening around her phone. She wanted to tell him that she had already forgiven him, for herself, not for him. But then, an unexpected question slipped out of her mouth. "William, did you ever know who I was? Did you know what I do for a living?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, with a hint of confusion, William answered, "Of course. You're a judge, right?" Anna smiled grimly. "I don't think you ever understood the depth of who I am. You thought you could mock me, belittle me, and make me feel small, but you didn't even know that I was the one you would someday stand before. A silence stretched out between them, longer this time, until William broke it with a sharp intake of breath. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" Anna leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a moment to savor the irony of the situation. "You really didn't know, did you?" she said, almost to herself. "You've spent so long assuming that I was just some random woman, just another target for your prejudice." William's voice grew desperate. "What are you saying?" Anna took a deep breath. "William Jones, I'm the judge who decided your fate in court today." There was a long, stunned silence. "You?" William stammered. "You were the one who—" He couldn't finish the sentence, as if the words didn't make sense in his mind. "Yes," Anna confirmed, her voice sharp. "I was the one who handed down your sentence. The one who gave you a second chance, a chance you didn't deserve, but that you still got. And you had no idea that I was the one you were mocking, belittling, and trying to make feel inferior." William let out a strangled laugh, his voice cracking. "I can't believe this. All this time." Anna felt a cold satisfaction sweep over her, but she didn't let herself revel in it. "You didn't know me, William. You didn't know who I was. And you still don't. You were too busy projecting your hatred onto me to ever see the truth." Another silence, heavier now, filled with the weight of the realization that had just dawned on him. "I'll never be the same again," William finally muttered, his voice thick with a mix of shame and disbelief. "No," Anna said firmly. "You won't. And neither will I." She ended the call without another word, the weight of the conversation lingering in the air. As Anna sat in her office, she realized that this was the final turning point in her life. She had confronted the past, faced down the man who had tried to diminish her, and reclaimed her power. She wasn't just a victim of a broken system. She was the one who would break it, from the inside out. And with that, she took her next breath, not as the woman who had to prove herself to anyone, but as the woman who had already proven everything she needed to prove. The judge had spoken.